anyway, it was great. Like it was a really, again, it was like this way of kind of engaging an interfaith kind of lens on the pressing issues that New Yorkers face. And now is this a good segue to what's going on now, or should we wait for?
Yes. Yeah, no, that's where I wanted to go. Yeah.
um, oh my gosh.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen.
Okay, good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted to be today's guest. Reverend Breyer, please introduce yourself.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me on today. And I have to say that I was somewhat relieved to find out that I could do this from the comfort of my desk and didn't have to walk and talk at the same time. But that's just a New Yorker speaking. I actually wanted to just share that I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the Boston area.
Mm-hmm.
I was born into a household where actually my father's Jewish, my mother was lapsed Anglican, and having grown up in England herself, went to schools that were part of the Church of England. And my sister and brother and I were baptized, but in such a way that I wouldn't say we were a particularly, how would you say, church-going family. We celebrated both sort of Passover and also attended Easter services. And as a child, that all made perfect sense to me. We're in a kind of academic milieu in Cambridge, and a sort of liberal bastion. So not a lot of religious observance going on. Obviously, I stuck around for college and majored in comparative religion and government as an undergraduate, and really then spent some time trying to kind of really understand about different faith traditions. I describe myself as a seeker when I was in kind of my late teens, early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And spent a week or two visiting a college roommate from Amarillo, Texas, which was a very different place to grow up. And I went to visit her after my freshman year, and really had the opportunity to meet a wonderful, former missionary to China, a 92-year-old Presbyterian minister who had been to Princeton Seminary and traveled in China between the First and Second World War, really going village to village as a missionary, learning the dialects, the language, the same generation as the Henry Luce, if you will. A lot of Princeton seminaries at that time went to China. And then I had never met somebody who kind of combined a real sense of intellectual curiosity and scientific inquiry with a deep-seated spirituality. And he talked about, in retrospect, he was pretty evangelical and talked about, waking up each morning and, dedicating himself to Christ, and that being a very adventurous way to live. And that really struck a chord in me. And I returned to college, where I was at Harvard University. And at that time, the Reverend Peter Gomes was the university chaplain. And he gave the most extraordinary Sunday sermons at University Chapel. But none of my friends were very religious, so I sort of sat off and listened to those sermons, and then really, as I said, majored in comparative religion, and actually took a year off and went to Nepal, India, and Tibet, and explored a little bit of Tibetan Buddhism. But then when I graduated, figured that if I really wanted to go further, I should really get a grip on my own faith tradition. And as I'd been baptized into the Church of England, I ended up being confirmed as well. So this was sort of, these were, this is an origin story, if you will. Mm-hmm. An explanation as to what were the early things that motivated the vocation that I now have, which is as a really a bivocational Episcopal priest, mm-hmm. where I have a Monday through Friday executive directorship at something called the Interfaith Center of New York that works with a whole lot of faith traditions all around the city. And on Sundays have a place to hang my hat in terms of a church home at Episcopal churches in Harlem. And so that's what it means to be a bivocational priest, and mm-hmm. a little bit of where of how I kind of got there.
Before we go to, because I have some questions, I would like you to elaborate a bit about what especially the center is doing, because it's really interesting from my perspective, at least. But in your journey, while you studied or when you chose your path, you also wrote a book about that, right? Mm-hmm. So I have two questions around that book. Is why did you decide to write it? And then second is, what are some of the reactions that you have received on, people who read that book? How was it received?
Sure. So to take the last question first, when I again graduated from college, I remember there were these like career fairs that people would go to, and just recall that there was never anything of like, did you want to explore the possibility of becoming a spiritual leader? Or, there was like, you could go to Booz Allen and Hamilton, but where was the, where were the Jesuits or I'm sure the Jesuits probably were there somewhere, but I didn't see a kind of path of exploration for individuals who wanted to really explore vocation in the ministry or in other sorts of faith traditions. So I decided to, when I went through the discernment process for ministry in Washington, D.C., I had, it was at about the time that Scott Turow, I think, wrote a book about the first year at law school, and there might have been another book about the first year at business school. And actually, so it was a publisher that pitched me on the idea of, well, what about we don't have like the first year of divinity school. And, I was being very enthusiastic at the time, was like, oh, great, I'll do that. So it ended up being quite a thing, and took me about 3 years to kind of go through seminary, also trying to write about it at the same time, which was a little challenging, but with the help of some great editor, it was really a great exercise to kind of put the experience in a composite way into the context of the liturgical year, because that really brought out themes of Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, that sort of frame my own experience as a seminarian, but also I thought would be like a window for other people who might be considering this path. And the feedback that I've gotten that's been most affirmative has really been from either the spouses of people going into the ministry, or somebody who I will meet who is, either a parish priest or somewhere else saying, oh, my commission on ministry really recommended that I read your book so that I had a chance to see what I was getting into.
Mm.
So that's really why I wrote it, and the feedback that has been most affirming has met that.
Tell a bit, referent about the center.
Yeah. So after I graduated from seminary, I went to, I worked as a chaplain at the cathedral school at St. John the Divine for 3 years, and then to a church in Harlem called St. Mary's Episcopal Church, where we actually started a volunteers exploring, it was called the New York Intern Program, where we had like 5 young adults applying to live in community and do social service work in New York. And I kind of directed that for a while, as well as, assisting at the parish. The former dean of the cathedral, James Parks Morton, is the founder of the organization that I now work at, the Interfaith Center of New York, which was really founded to be a place that the vast diversity of New York's religious communities could really convene, and that we would be a place where we could kind of activate the power of grassroots faith leaders to really, overcome difference by working together just on shared concerns, and also strengthen the civil society, the kind of civic fabric of New York. So it was an intersection of the civic experience and religious diversity, which actually brought me right back to my major in college. Mm-hmm. And I was thrilled to have the experience and joined in 2007 as the executive director. And since that time, we've found ourselves really just walking alongside the life of the city. And, after 9/11, we spent just a lot of time being in solidarity with Muslim New Yorkers of so many different backgrounds, as the NYPD really cracked down and did a lot of surveillance of mosques and profiling, and we kind of advocated also with Pentecostal pastors whose congregants were also experiencing stop and frisk, and found that was a really powerful interfaith coalition. And eventually we ended up working with a lot of other advocates around the city to actually get a inspector general that was at the NYPD. And by 2015, there were enough lawsuits and so forth that there was a real sea change. And this idea of more of a collaborative policing idea came about. And that was just an example of one type of shared concern. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we're doing a lot of education. We're offering a civics training for grassroots faith leaders, like a cohort model, where a lot of really diverse faith leaders come together like on a weekly basis, and they meet, community organizers and civic leaders and politicians, and they learn about how to get things done in New York for their communities and for the wider good. And then finally, we now run a religious diversity training for the NYPD, which is pretty exciting, because that's a lot of people, and they have a big impact on like when they walk into a mosque and take their shoes off, that means a lot. Or if they are meeting up with an Orthodox Jewish woman and know not to reach out their hand to shake hands, because that's not part of their tradition, that again goes a long way in establishing trust, which is the half of what it means to be good law enforcement, actually. So that's the kind of stuff we do, which I've been doing since 2007, and it's awesome. I love it.
No, and thanks for sharing it. I have two before I ask you a question about, what's the situation now? What are your main challenges at the moment? Let us go back a couple of years. How was it during COVID? And where also at the same time, a lot of things around Black Lives Matter happened as well. And so what did that do for your
Well,
community
I
and
mean,
work?
in terms on I think it was COVID, obviously, which was so difficult for so many faith communities in particular. With in Harlem, where I live, just a few blocks down the road from my apartment, there was a church that lost something like 20 individuals, because they didn't close. And you can't even, and it's a compounded sort of grief, because then you can't bury someone and get the closure that you needed. I mean, that was the isolation was just so awful. And at my own church too. I mean, we were very lucky in that we didn't have a lot of direct deaths as a result of COVID, but just the isolation was really, really tough on people. And so what we tried to do at the Interfaith Center was to recognize the need that people had to grieve. And so we collaborated with Lincoln Center on a program that we just put together with like the Board of Rabbis, the Diocese of Brooklyn, and some others, to have it's called, what do we call it? We called it for memory of us all, or in memory of us all. And it was like, it started with, full disclosure, my husband's at jazz at Lincoln Center. So it started with Wynton Marsalis and the orchestra doing basically a funeral march. And then we scrolled the names of people who had died over the music. And it was just like, and then we started getting a ton of names, and we did that for 8 or 10 weeks, I think, with different artists from Lincoln Center. And we would, and we would also then scroll the names of the dead, so that people could, share online a sense that they weren't alone. I guess that was all we could do. And that was like the most powerful thing, I think, that we did during that time. And then when Black Lives Matter stuff that was happening, we for several years after that had a whole kind of racial justice, an interfaith racial justice lens on a lot of the work that we did. So after George Floyd, that we had the mayoral elections came up pretty quickly, and we pulled together a whole coalition of different different faith leaders to say, like, what's our agenda for the next mayor? Like, what's our racial justice agenda as faith leaders of different traditions? And things like closing Rikers Island, or the bail reform piece, and so forth. We kind of just put that together, and then invited people who were running for office to come and tell us about it and what they were going to do. And we got somebody who's running for comptroller. We got a couple of the mayoral candidates. I don't think we ever got Adams, but anyway, it was great. Like, it was it was like this way of kind of engaging an interfaith kind of lens on the pressing issues that New Yorkers face.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And now is this a good segue to what's going on now, or should we wait?
Yes. Yeah, no, that's where I wanted to go. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So 2022, our mission has always included the work that we do with grassroots and immigrant faith leaders. So from the very beginning, at least of my time here, we have always engaged with new New Yorkers, especially their faith leaders, because in these communities, it's not just the faith leader doing their faith leader job. They are also the interlocutor for so many other issues, for immigration concerns, for law enforcement, for things that people don't understand about the system. It's like the faith leader gets it all. So when 2022 rolled around and those buses started arriving, sent to us by, our dear friend, Governor Abbott, and the other Southern governors, we were right pretty much a degree of separation away from faith leaders who were just meeting and activists that were meeting the buses. Like
Breyer, I mean, just one second, because we have also listeners from outside of the US. So why were people arriving then from other states to New York? What happened?
So, Governor Abbott is the Republican governor of Texas, and he decided that it was in some ways a brilliant political move. He was going to just put everybody who had walked, thousands of miles through the Darien Gap, not just from Venezuela, but from Senegal. Like a lot of people that we work with come from West Africa, and they take the trek, they fly across the Atlantic, or they go up to Spain and then fly across to Brazil, take the same route that everybody does from Latin America through these god-awful jungles, and arrived on the southern border. And what Abbott was doing was, instead of, processing people there and, and helping them or not helping them find places to live and so forth, he was putting them straight onto buses for maybe 16 hours to arrive at Port Authority in New York. Children coming with flip-flops, like people with nothing, being put onto buses, not even coordinating with, like, there was no coordination between Abbott and our mayor. Like, he was just it was part of the thing. Like, we're going to show these cities that call themselves sanctuary cities. We're going to show them, we're going to make them put their money where their mouth is, or so forth. And thus, what could have been, had it been a coordinated good faith effort, actually a very good idea, because, New York City has been receiving immigrants for hundreds of years, and we are a good place to come, I think, as it goes. But it wasn't a good faith effort. It was a political ploy using human beings as pawns. And so there was that. So it just, the number of people arriving in New York with no community to receive them, because there wasn't like a big Venezuelan population. Like there are populations of so many groups here in New York, but there wasn't somebody from Venezuela. For people coming from West Africa, there were the mosques in the Bronx, who we had very good relationships with. And those mosques, I mean, people, there's one imam who, like, you go up to visit him on, in the Bronx, and he gets 5 or 6 calls a day from border control in Texas or California saying, we have somebody here, he's putting your address down. Is it okay if we release him from detention to you? And the imam always says yes. So that is just an example. And so it was just a huge scramble for so many people. The city, has tried very hard, with a very mixed success rate, but they certainly put together an entire parallel shelter system. They, specifically catering to the needs of families on the one hand, or single men on the other, who would come, who were desperate to work. It's, the advocacy community, of which many are faith groups, have been really trying hard to, to just to be able to help people. And the Interfaith Center has developed a network of about 90 houses of worship, faith communities, and community-based organizations that have been doing everything from holding, weekly soup kitchens and clothing closets and legal clinics to providing actual shelter. So it's a network that was developed really in rapid response to this enormous, uptick. Something like 160,000 people came through New York, of which about 65,000 stayed. And so this means getting people into public schools, which actually the school system has done a pretty good job overall, I would say. But it's meant, trying to find that, New York's economy. One thing that we do have is the opportunities to work. Whether or not they're legal is a whole nother thing. But the city did a great job on processing a huge number of asylum seeker applications, which is important because once you've applied for asylum, there's a waiting period, but then you do get the right to work. So whether or not you actually receive asylum, 10 years down the line is a different story. Anyway, so we've been very much embroiled in that, and that are, like everyone else, with huge trepidation awaiting January 20th, because as much work that's gone into trying to welcome new New Yorkers, we are so vulnerable to the threats that soon to be President Trump is making for deportation. And it's just the saddest, most agonizing thing, because so many of these, again, new New Yorkers are the people that 10 years down the line will be running the city. Like our current, our current city council has such a large number of people that were either second generation New Yorkers that came here from somewhere else, that were passionate about the city and have done so much for this metropolis. So the idea of deporting, individuals whose only crime, as it were, is the desire to work and to provide for their families is really a sickening thought. And how we prepare for it it's everybody's best guess.
Because it's still unclear what exactly will happen, right? So that makes it difficult also to...
It makes it difficult, but I think, if you listen to what he says, we are absolutely a target. And whether it be, the use of the National Guard to kind of round people up and put them onto, planes back to wherever, there've already been ICE pickups that have happened both in New Jersey and also in Queens, where at least one individual from Senegal was taken, put into detention in Texas and then flown back to a different country than he came from.
Within a month, you should know more in terms of what will be happening, and
Yes.
So and then what type of activities that you can do. Yeah, so you have been able to really be this interfaith a network of people. So different. You might not agree on everything, but you have found something that is important to work on together. Does that your whole community think like that?
Well, it's just as interesting that, one of the big surprises about the election was the number of, I think, like Latino men and people who themselves are, if they aren't people that you would think would see it as in their own interest not to vote for somebody who's threatening deportation. But the message just somehow didn't get through, or it did get through in a way that, it's a bit of a mystery to me. I don't really understand. I think that, I don't know what to say. I mean, I think it's evidence perhaps that we all, or at least here in New York, many of us doing this work are living in a more of a bubble than we anticipated.
Mhm.
That's probably, that's pretty clear. It may be also that there's a perception that when, that there are precious resources that are being used up somehow by immigrant communities, and you combine that with the real demonization that the incoming administration has been pretty good at, with Haitian community, craziness in Springfield, really clearly hit a nerve, and I think all human beings think, like, when the chips are down, like if you make people afraid enough, they'll do anything to really protect themselves and their families, and that's I fear that way of thinking is becoming more prevalent. So yeah.
So, a lot of things that you worry about. Where do you still see hope or find hope?
Yeah, I see hope in the networks of really passionate advocates that and faith leaders in the city who are kind of doing the impossible, who are in the face of what really looks like a very dismal situation, are not just sitting back, throwing up their hands in a sense of powerlessness, but are making connections and are saying, okay, here are our rapid response plans. These are our know your rights programs. Like, here is the new community connections that we can make across faith lines, because we need to know each other's phone numbers in the community if there's an ICE raid, or if we do, we just need to know each other, and we need to form community in places that we've never done before, because we realize something serious is kind of coming down the pike and we need each other. So I think that is where I find hope and so it's in the community that we form with one another, even more now than we ever have, and across even more lines of religious and other difference.
Yeah, Reverend Breyer, in when we started to talk with each other, you were alluding that I'm happy that I don't have to walk, that we can just talk. This particular podcast is a spin-off of a 100-mile walk that I started in 2012 to raise awareness and funding and funds for ending hunger, poverty, and injustice. A question that I often ask to my listeners is, if you would be asked to walk 100 miles like I try to do every year, within a week, for which cause would you walk?
For which cause would I walk? I was expecting you to say, where would you walk?
First we pick the cause and then you can decide where. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I would walk for my New Yorker neighbors.
Uh-huh.
I would walk for them.
Okay. And where?
I would definitely, okay, so I do 25 miles in all 4 boroughs. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then I might head upstate and do 100 miles in some of the Auburn, New York,
Mm-hmm.
all the Finger Lake areas where there's a lot of amazing history around the gosh, the like abolitionist movement and so forth, but it's also a place where there's a lot of farm workers. And my colleague, Reverend Richard Witt, runs Rural and Migrant Ministries uptown. So I've gone to see him, and it's both beautiful and also there's a lot happening in those counties regarding, migrant communities. So.
Okay, maybe I will invite you the next time I'm doing my 100-mile walk.
I'd love that.
I aim for
I love
this
that.
15 to 20 miles per day. Yeah.
Oh, that would be amazing. And I actually did a walk recently along, I have various relatives and so forth in England, but I took St. Cuthbert's Way. Goes from, well, I didn't do the whole thing, but I started in Wooler in North England and walked to the North Sea, where Lindisfarne, the Isle of Lindisfarne is. And that was an incredible sort of pilgrimage walk. So
nice. So yeah, we have a deal. When I walk, I'm often accompanied by people that join me for a mile or for a couple of miles over the whole day. And then often we talk about, what is the purpose? What's the purpose of walking? What's the purpose of life? And very often we end up talking about the next generation and how they experience religion and spirituality. So I've turned that into a question for all my guests, and the question is, what do you see happening among the younger generation in your community in relation to religion and spirituality?
Well, I have two children who are both college age, and both it's hard to be the child of a sort of a minister slash, they both got as far as being
the preacher's kids.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. They both got as far as being confirmed, and I think we'll see. We'll see where things go from them. But they are my two data points. They're curious. They're interested, and they don't write off religion in the way that perhaps many in my generation did. They're concerned about their future, obviously. They have a sense of the value of activism. And I'm generally impressed by people of that age in terms of both their wisdom, and also I think they're in some ways a lot more savvy than I recall being at that age. So I'm not sure that answers your question.
No, it does, and does within that consciousness then. And being concerned, is the church, potentially still playing a role, or is it much more, what some folks would call more spiritual than religious?
Having worked for 2 decades in Episcopal congregations in Harlem, it's pretty clear that most of the people occupying the pews in our church anyway are older people, and that we don't have the large number, at least in Harlem. That's not so true in other congregations, but that's definitely the case with the Episcopal Church in Harlem. And the efforts that we make to engage younger people are really important. I think for that reason, somewhere like Taizé in France is a great model. Do you know what I mean by Taizé?
No, I don't.
Okay, it was started after World War II, a monastic ecumenical community, started by Brother Roger was his name, who was the founder of Taizé. And they have thousands and thousands of younger people from all over Europe and all over the world who go to visit their center in Taizé in France. They have a whole form of singing it's really sort of a singing chant, what have you. they do kind of gatherings all over the world as well. And I went out to Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota for a 3-day gathering that they did on overlooking the Black Hills, camping on a land there owned by actually an Episcopal priest who I went to seminary with. His father had the land. So I think young adult programs are probably that pay attention to the role. An integrated life is what people are looking for, and religion at its best allows for that. And not only allows for it, but helps promote that. And thus, the more when we talk about vocation and discernment of vocation, I think that a practice of spiritual practice that involves a community of people. Like, I don't think it is enough to be a kind of individual spiritualist. Like, I think that one is shaped by community, and that's what quote unquote organized religion helps provide. That is a very important ingredient. So but I think that once you have that, it's easier to discern kind of where your gifts and the world's needs actually meet.
And so you were saying, okay, we are trying to reach out into the younger generation and to involve them. Are you succeeding?
I don't think yet. No, not yet. We need to do more of it. We really do. I mean, I'm speaking now with my Episcopal.
No, understood. Yeah.
Great models, but we need more.
Okay. Maybe piggybacking on what you said in terms of what the younger generation is looking for. I would maybe translate that into. I think the younger generation is really interested in what in the NGO sector, we're pushing for in terms of the sustainable development goals. It might not be perfect, but at least we as a world, started to discuss, and we said we need to do better. So those 17 goals were identified that we need to reach before 2030, and we are only at 15 to 17%, on average. So I ask all my guests always, are you aware of the sustainable development goals? And if you are, what do you like the listeners to know about those 17 SDGs, sustainable development goals?
Well, I kind of, when I first joined a church, was part of a church in Harlem. I worked for 6 months on a program. It's actually a grant from the UN Foundation to gather faith leaders from around the country in support of the Millennium Development Goals. So that gives you a little bit of a time warp there. I mean, I can tell you a lot about the Millennium Development Goals because I think those were they actually. There were some measures around women's education, I think, or maternal mortality, extreme poverty that actually improved, which I feel like we've done a lot of backsliding since the Millennium Development Goals were superseded by the Sustainable Development Goals. I feel like there's been, I don't know this for a fact, but I feel like there's been serious backsliding that's happened.
Right. First, for the listeners, so the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, were the goals that were identified before the Sustainable Development Goals. And why the Sustainable Development Goals came up, because the MDGs were criticized, that was a brain wave of more of the West and or from universities, academics, and so more people were involved in developing the 17 goals. Maybe too many. I do think that initially successes were made. I mean, because of COVID, because of wars, some of the progress that we made initially, we got some setbacks there. I mean, we are really living in a polycrisis. So yeah.
Well, what I love about what was so helpful about both the Millennium Development Goals and the SDGs was that it's a new way of framing the anti-poverty and like pro education efforts very locally in Harlem. I mean, to be able to kind of bring, kids that are facing a lot of obstacles, in our neighborhoods around New York, and to say, look, your efforts are part of a global, a global set of goals that that are achievable or by people from every country. I think again it's an amazing opportunity to reframe local efforts that just don't maybe seem that glamorous, or that they'll never work, or things like that. I think it's an incredible platform, and for that reason alone, I think it's really really fantastic.
Okay, great. So that's I pick that. I will pick that as your telling the listeners that realize that the 17 sustainable development goals, that's not something abstract. It concerns us all. It makes us realize that we're all interconnected. One other thing that came up as a when we are looking at, okay, we are not making the progress that we need to make. And a growing group of people around the world is saying, one of the reasons is it's not only the crisis, but it is also the fact that we did not pay proper attention to the skills, abilities, and knowledge that you need as an individual and as a community to work on those process and system changes, because that's what the SDGs are about, and so as a result of that discussion, inner development goals were identified, 5 inner development goals: being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And then 23 skills were identified, like empathy, trust, critical thinking. What did that do? Because I asked you to look at that. What are your initial thoughts about the inner development goals?
Well, I think it's that they're, those are so important, and it's a different, I think there have been ways of paying attention to the, the inner development of human beings for, time immemorial, and that was for many thousands of years the role of religion, to help develop the kind of inner growth of human beings, the meaning of human life that wasn't necessarily answered in other ways. And to the degree that the importance of inner development is addressed by these goals, that's fantastic, because there are people here, there are people now that won't necessarily be part of a religious tradition, or they may not see the value in that, but they may be able to hear what these, something that's part of a larger set of humanistic and humanitarian goals. Like, it's just another way to say human life is more than the material things around us.
Okay. Before we started recording it, asked me, okay, what do you hope to achieve with this podcast? And one of the things that I really hope is, connecting people with each other. I'm connecting you with my listeners. We are connected. I also came up with a question where I connect you with the previous guest, and the previous guest has a question for you.
How do you make sure that you can be you?
That's an interesting question. I would add, or I would try to, can you be sure that you can be you for I guess for a value, for a higher aspiration, for a vision of God, for a set of transcendent values. That how can you make sure that you are you for those things, for those values, for that purpose, for because to me that's the interesting question. Like I feel like there's this incredible combination of the gifts, the skills, the life experience, the vocation that I have and other human beings have, other people have. And the question is, like, for what end? Like, where do your particularities, your life experience, your character, your loves, your hates, your where do they meet, as I referred to earlier, the needs of the world, or the expressions of love that go beyond ourselves. So the you, if I were Buddhist, I would question that whole notion of a kind of permanent you. But I think that it's always good to interrogate, what is the, I guess I don't see it as an end in of itself. Like, how do you make sure you are you? Well, how do you make sure you are you for the transcendent value that you can attain, or the way that you can serve? I'm not putting it very well, but that's my immediate thought. So
your question for the next guest.
Well, I'm curious, in a time of of many conflicting demands that are made on people today. How do you how do you keep yourself refreshed, I guess, in the how do you keep yourself alive and aware in the tsunami of demands and fears and so forth that are particularly acute right now?
Okay. Interesting question. I have a couple of questions for you, and which we are going to do a little bit more as a kind of a rapid fire. So if you can stick with shorter answers.
Yeah.
Music is very important to me, so I always have a question about music as well. So if you had to choose a song or a piece of music that represents for a big part of who you are, which song or piece of music would that be, and why?
Song or piece of music. I would say I have spent 12 years at a church in Harlem where the most beautiful gospel and spirituals are part of worship, and those to me are much of what I am.
Can you name one song or two songs?
One or two songs. Blessed Assurance is one. Blessed Assurance and Precious Lord is another.
Okay. Yeah, if I ask you to come up with a message or a question, for the listeners, what would that be?
How do you
Or an
cultivate?
invitation? Yeah.
Well, I guess how do you cultivate patience? I would love to know how what is your practice of cultivating patience?
Okay.
That'd be the answer.
Yeah. I don't know if this is still going on, but Steve Hartman, at least he used to do this in CBS, to examine how one simple act of kindness can create a ripple effect. So I have two questions for you around this. What are your thoughts about the potential of one simple act of kindness in terms of the ripple effect? And then second is, if I would ask you to come up with one simple act of kindness for this week, what would you do?
For me or for everyone, for what is for me this coming week, what would be my simple act of kindness? I think to, give someone who I walk by on the street a bit of money and a bit of my time to have a conversation with them.
Okay. And then the first question was, what are your thoughts in terms of the ripple effect, potential ripple effect of a simple act of kindness?
Well, I think there are ripple effects of simple acts of kindness. I think there are real ripple effects of simple acts of kindness, and we are called by our faith and also our goodwill to participate in the public square to address systemic problems that make us have to do acts of kindness to begin with.
Okay. My last question for you is any question that I should have asked you, but I didn't.
I think, what does it mean to be a woman faith leader in the world today? And I think that's something that I might not have thought to ask before I became one, because I was definitely brought up in a world in which men and women could do everything equally all the time, and it's taken being an ordained priest in the church to recognize that actually it's not exactly the same, and there are still quite a few obstacles and differences to be overcome. So that would be
tell us a bit about that then.
Every major push forward in the widening of human rights for individuals seems to come with an accompanying backlash, and we're certainly in that moment right now, not just in the church, but in the wider world, with the rollback of abortion rights in the United States, with the increasingly, patriarchal, political arrangements, from everything from Afghanistan is the most extreme example under the Taliban, but there are other, Hungary, Putin, you name it, where our own government is really adopting the frame of a kind of big, tough guy model of political leadership. So all that is to say that we've got our work cut out for us, both in the world and in the church.
So, if knowing what you know now, and if you would have been brought back into time, would you still make the same choice in terms of
choice?
Now, the path that you have walked, becoming an ordained.
I mean, I look back, and I really feel like I have chosen a way that has been life-giving for me. and maybe there are other choices that could have led to other, well, they're by definition, other choices could have led to different places. But the way that I have walked has been it's been what I had hoped when I sat down with this 92-year-old missionary. It's been a life of adventure and fullness and life. I mean, of something generative, and family and so forth, interesting career and so forth. So, yeah.
Reverend Breyer, thank you so much for your willingness to talk with me today, for sharing your wisdom, knowledge, experiences. I really enjoyed it. All the best with what you do. And I know, the period to come might not be easy, but, listening to you also, I mean, there is enough still to be thankful for and to be hopeful about. So
good. I'm good. I'm
the
glad
great
that you have that response.
Yeah. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much. Best of luck.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.